Hi. So let us have a look at the investment and confluence theory of creativity. What this theory does is it defines creativity. Before this, creativity was just a term to explain what the smartest of the people. But Sternberg in 1991 has studied both the person-centric approach as well as the context-centric approach to define creativity. The person-centric approach is the qualities of an individual, whereas the context-centric approach is something which is related to the environment of the individual where he works in. So what Sternberg did, he studied both the theories, both concepts, and came up with his own investment theory. Now the name investment has been given because he studied a simple example of a creative investor. Now, if you look at a creative investor, what he does is he buys low and sells high. Now, buying low will actually mean he buys a share at a very low price, and selling high, he sells the share at a very high price. In this process, he gains profit. So he is a creative investor. Now, how does he do that? It looks very simple, but it is much more complicated than this. Buying low actually means to get an idea which is very unpopular among the people, or people somehow rejected it, or people somehow tend to ignore it. So he gets an idea which is very unpopular. Before selling it high, he needs to increase the demand. So he convinces people that the idea which he has is actually very good. Somehow people get convinced about it. The demand for that idea increases, and then he sells that idea at a higher price. So this process is completely explained by this confluence theory. So let's have a look at a few aspects of this theory. Now, this creativity of a person is defined by 6 different aspects. The first is the intelligence. The second is the knowledge. Third is the intellectual skills of a person. Fourth is the personality. Fifth is the motivation of the person. And sixth is the environment. The first 5 aspects is the person-centric approach to creativity, whereas the last aspect is a context approach to the creativity. So Sternberg combined all these, and he has defined each and every term separately and came up with his own theory. Now let us have a look at each and every aspect individually. First, the intelligence. Now, intelligence of a person is defined in 3 different manners. The first is synthetic, the second is analytical, and the third is practical. Synthetic means the way the individual thinks out of the box, the way he looks at the things in a new perspective. Analytical means to find out which of the idea is worth selecting, whereas practical means the way he is able to convince the people about that idea. So these 3 aspects define the intelligence of a person. The second aspect is the knowledge. Now, the knowledge of a person is directly proportional to the creativity. So if the person doesn't have any knowledge, then the creativity will be equal to 0. In the other manner, if you look at the knowledge, if a person has too much knowledge about a subject, that's a problem too. Because if he has too much knowledge about a particular subject, he tends to have focus on just one direction. He's not able to think in different directions. He thinks he is right. He thinks the approach is only simple, one directional. That's a problem if you have too much knowledge. So the knowledge about a particular subject should be absolutely perfect. Not more than what is required and not less than what is required. The third is the intellectual skills. Now, intellectual skills doesn't mean what is the intelligence of a person. Now, intellectual styles means the way he thinks about the idea, having a new perspective to look at the same thing again and again. Now, having good intellectual skills doesn't mean you are more creative. Intellectual skills can be more creative as well as less creative at the same time. Now that's a little confusing. We'll look into that later on. The personality of a person depends on three different aspects: the willingness to take risks, the willingness to overcome the obstacles, and the willingness to accept his ambiguity. Ambiguity means imperfection. You have to accept that we cannot be perfect all the time. Now, the most important is willingness to take sensible risks. Now, it has been observed by experimental processes that the more calculated risk a person takes, the more creative he is. So, his personality plays a vital role in defining how creative a person is. Next comes the motivation. Motivation. Now, motivation is again a very vital thing, vital aspect of this creativity, because it has been observed that the person is not motivated to do the things, then he won't be creative. Unless people like what they do, they cannot be creative. If you put a person in a department where he doesn't like to work, he just cannot be creative. He'll just do his work and leave in time. Next, the environment. Now, the environment plays again a very important role. I told you this is the context-centric approach of the creativity. If the environment isn't supporting and rewarding, then it is very difficult for a person to be creative. There are many obstacles an environment can give. There can be major obstacles or minor obstacles. The minor obstacles could be negative comments from an individual. Major obstacles could be the threat to life or someone. So, environment again plays a major important role in this. Now, this was completely investment. Now, the confluence of these all six aspects. Now, the confluence of these all aspects is not actually the addition of the aspects. The intensity of the six aspects varies the creativity of the person. Okay, so if you take a look at the example, if a person has knowledge and motivation, then the intelligence factor really doesn't matter much. If a person has less intelligence but is more motivated and with extra knowledge which he has, he can be more creative. In the other example, if the person has no knowledge, then it absolutely doesn't matter what the other aspects are. If he scores full in all other aspects but has no knowledge, he cannot be creative. So, the confluence of these objects, a proper confluence, a proper formula or a proper combination of these aspects is absolutely necessary for a person to be more creative. So, this was the investment and the confluence theory of Sternberg.